So I chose to talk today about the fertility of the labyrinth, since I worked the next of your problem with Boris during the last semester. Some things stay promisingly unresolved. So this talk wants to take you on this winding path through the voices in art and philosophy. And it's also inspired by the PhD seminar of Peter Willer on ethos last semester, and considering the architectonics of writing between myth and logos. So in ancient times, the labyrinth was often as a mirror model of the universe, and it is a common metaphor for continuity, irrationality, immensity, vastness, and the unknown. And my aim is to kind of free the labyrinth from its colossal symbolic weight as they seem. So those metaphors of vastness and the unknown, they seem to elude new knowledge and curiosity. I am looking instead at a lightweight figure of a certain order, where the center is not a conformance. Seemingly, I want to bring the labyrinth from myth to the roots. Therefore, I will take the optics of a specific writing format, the essay. So the writing of an essay cannot be equated to the making of a labyrinth, but the hypothesis is that they share common architectonic gestures. Subject of this study are the writings of Boris in this edition, Labyrinths. But so the writings actually were never defined as essays, but they have the qualities of it. To condense the architectonic gestures of it and make a concrete function with other voices, I will look at the labyrinths through the optics of the essay, so to test its architectonic spectrum. The essay. The word essay dates back to the 12th century, and it comes from the Latin phrase exagium, meaning a scale or a weighing. In proximity to this term lies the term examen, meaning a needle, a long narrow strip on the beam of the scale, so an instrument of precision. Combining this, the outcome is a weight consideration set in motion. This means that the trying within the essay refers to something outside of itself, and it is not about the author making a self-experimental journey. In this way, I also don't want to look at the labyrinth in the sense of the journey of an individual. In both the labyrinth and the essay, we do not take measurements, but weigh the things that we encounter. What is promising in this setup is that both the labyrinth as the key and the essay as writing form elude an absolute definition. The mechanics. Inversion. With the eyes of the scale, the outside rolls inwards. We listen to the silence of impelling force, a winding and unwinding of the individual and the word. We won't look at the labyrinth as a prison-like structure whose function is to confuse the reader, but with a focus on the autonomous movement within the walls. Therefore, I want to look at the paintings of Josef Zekov, born in Vienna, actually, still living. And he painted labyrinths for years. His strokes, rings, and sways. He's persistent. Every image is a new one. Over and over again, he brings the blank form of a labyrinth onto the paper. Zekov's continuous revisions are not motivable. He doesn't care for symbolically charged image. Plain, color, form, and content are sublated into each other, and if it at all, the whole image, the pictorial activity itself becomes the motive. Comparable to the amphora, the labyrinth does not have windows. They are only open to the sky. But they also miss the ground, so they have no ability to contain. Everything flows through them. So what is the relation of the inside to the outside? The walls roll up, the outside inwards. A labyrinth doesn't consist of an outside, it swallows everything up. Zekov's labyrinths, even though they are two-dimensional and we look upon them, or we are in front of them, they require a bodily perception. The canvas does not function as a finestra aperta. The labyrinth is a typology which eludes center perspective and misses the overview. The Russian philosopher Tatyana Linsova writes, the meaning of the path is not in search by out, but in the path itself. This movement has no outline, purpose, roots, and rules. In the process of movement, a unique existential figure is created, a unique part of individual existence. The labyrinth is created by this movement in it. And I would also like to think of it in terms of how Elias mentions the labyrinth in his book Natural Communication. So you write, the labyrinth is not pre-existing in any sense, but it is the space opened up by all those meandering paths, which serves to embrace its sacred center. This is at any rate the route we have to take in case the obstacle is an obstacle in time. Within the academic discourse, one perceives an obligation to maintain an objective stance and go from nowhere, or to perform what Donna Haraway calls the God trick. The essay is instead often described as quite self-reflective and intimate. Michel de Montaigne's essays convey both an intimacy and an immediacy extended from writer to reader. In Paul Klee's thinking, the personal experience of the artist is a work of rational being. Therefore, the formation is never only individual, but always of universal nature at the same time. So his sketchbook, The Thinking Eye, attains a pedagogical position. Giulio Carlo Argan, in his preface to this book, The Thinking Eye, wrote, through all meditation and active creation, which constitutes artistic activity, experience performs ever-widening circles until finally it touches the furthermost limits of the universe and returns to the point of maximum intensity. That is, the point of formation of Gestaltung, where each sign signifies at the same time the individual and the world, the present and all time. In Jorge Luis Borges' essays, the own perspective as narrator is treated skeptically. So there's one short writing that's called The Other, 1977, where the author meets his alter ego on a bench, which existed in two times and in two spaces, or places better. They hold a conversation with each other. And in his essay with the suggested title, The Nothingness of Personality, he points out that our own perspective is just a meaningless circumstance. I, as I write this, am only a certainty that seeks out the words that are most apt to compel your attention. That proposition and a few muscular sensations and the sight of the limpid branches that the trees place outside my window constitute my current I. In this gesture of emptying the content of his current individuality, it actually gains in sharpness. The effect to the reader might then be that he alienates at the same time from a narrative perspective. In a small poem, Borges alludes to the impossibility of an inside and outside at the same time. So he writes, there'll never be a door, you're inside, and the key encompasses the world, and has neither obverse nor reverse, nor circling, nor secret center. This may refer also to the saying he often cites in other writings, that the world is a sphere whose centers everywhere and whose circumference nowhere, famously from Pascal and Musset. Therefore, one can actually not really think of an inversion here. Borges constructs his literary I with words that wind and unwind until they are somewhere neither inside or outside, but both. Second, impersonation. The foreigner enters, sojourns like a nomad in the loops of thoughts, listens to the echo of the voice of the other while orienting himself to personal affinities. So as second waving, I want to reflect on the perspective of the eye, both in the labyrinth and in the essay. And the gesture of waving supposes a personal alignment. Therefore, I want to look at a drawing of Escher named Convex from 1955. The complexity of Escher's visual labyrinths involves the viewer's ability or inability to read the structure to composition. For example, a single surface may be simultaneously a floor, wall, and ceiling. So also does Borges require the reader to enter the labyrinth of his writings while maintaining enough perspective to allow for multiple readings and interpretations. In order to understand the labyrinth, the reader needs to allow himself to be drawn into the inner border. But that means entering it, dwelling, or better so journeying in it, because one keeps in constant movement. The stranger must engage with it in a different way than the aesthetic categories he brings with him prescribe. The labyrinth is only perceived able then by subject walking to it, its nature cannot be reduced to the image. Rosalie Guidotti writes in a preface to the Post-Human Glossary, as the perceiving and thinking subjects that observe and account for the world, we are situated within it, not external or transcendent. And Susan Sontag, in the introduction, and Walter Benjamin's One-Way Street and other writings, writes, a book is not only a fragment of the world, but itself a little word. The book is a miniaturization of the world which the reader inhabits. And following Agamben and his thinking about the genius impersonations, the ones that refuse to impersonate the impersonal, to lend their lips to a voice that does not belong to them, are more serious, but less happy. So, should we speak of faith as the motivation for the movement, not knowing the map? Brian Dion named his current collection from 2023, current collection of essays, Affinities. Affinities on art and fascination. So he admits that he chooses his themes by quite personal choices. Affinity stems from the 12th century also, meaning a relationship, kinship, neighborhood from affinis, and adjoining, adjacent, literally bordering on. So affinis meaning a border or boundary. Borges addresses his faith, this faith as the motor of movement, for example, in the Library of Baden, where he, or the protagonist, the narrator, writes, there's a myth circulating in this library, and some people believe it. A book exists that can explain everything, it can only be found. And this is the motivation for the infinite searching. And then in another essay, he writes, the poem gains, if we look on it as the expression of a longing, not the account of an actual happening. In Leibniz's mind, viewed from in the eyes of Serre, the methodical order acts locally and considering the system part by part. Consequently, the Ariadne thread explores a so-called singular region from a single point of view. Third, contraction. A condensing of times, the attention of the presence in the narrowness walls. We already walked through these corridors that approach infinity 1,001 times. Brevity is the soul of wit, but this brevity is not produced by my formal shortness of the essay. Rather, it is understood as a long muscle in contraction. The muscle only contracts when the body is in a mode of attention. This corresponds to the narrowness of the corridors of the labyrinth. A labyrinth behaves ahistorical. It does not care about a beginning and an end point. Comparable to taking astrology as an instrument for theory making, the essay looks at the past and present at the same time by considering how the past emerges in the present. This being out of linear time is a fruitful challenge for theory. Borges creates a complex spatio-temporal layering. When things get compressed, they are the opposite of a smoothed out surface. They create binding paths. Borges reflects on this in his writing, The Aleph. Perhaps the gods might grant me a similar metaphor, but then this account would become contaminated by literature, by fiction. Really, what I want to do is impossible, for any listing of an endless series is doomed to be infinitesimal. In that single gigantic instant, I saw millions of acts, both delightful and awful. Not one of them amazed me more than the fact that all of them occupied the same point in space without overlapping or transparency. What my eyes beheld was simultaneous, but what I shall now write down will be successive, because language is successive. Serre, when he writes on Leibniz, says he would have to draw, not write, to escape the supplication of linearity and achieve the speciality of the system. Both the essay and the labyrinth form an image that can be only perceived in time. In the essay, though, being read in sequence, we get a feeling of simultaneity. Despite the complexity of his ideas, Borges often uses a concise and minimalist writing style. His prose is precise and economical, devoid of unnecessary embellishments, which allows readers to focus on the ideas and concepts he presents. The use of semicolon evokes a state of present attention. Particularly when Borges is compiling lists that span centuries, he has a predilection for the endless sentence with semicolons. And Borges takes the cornucopia of a word perceived by a multitude of individuals into one. And this is also an excerpt from the same writing, The Aleph, when he then views this Aleph, this point in the basement where all the possible views, perspectives are kind of contracted in one, then this is only part of it. He said, I saw the teeming sea, I saw daybreak and nightfall, I saw the multitudes of America, I saw silvery cover in the center of the black pyramid, I saw splintered labyrinth that was one, I saw close up unending eyes, I saw all the mirrors on earth, and none of them reflected me. I saw in the backyard of the street the same studios by the entrance of 1,000 labyrinths. So equatorial deserts, and each there are grains of sand. I saw a woman in Venice whom I shall never forget. I saw her tangled hair, her tall figure, I saw the cancer in her breast. I saw a ring of vacant mud in the sidewalk where before there had been a tree. And so on. The sequencing of a sentence I would like to refer to as concatenation, but not in the sense of cause and effect, just as a state of being linked together. And I found this term also in the Oxford Dictionary of Architecture, with the example of Masacci's fresco of the Trinity, meaning a jointing of individual elements in rooms in a sequence of ratios. And it was also referred as a founding element in Palladio's architectural system. But this was actually the only information I found that I want to search. And yeah, I want to look at it more. So I don't know if this kind of term is promising or also a bit limiting. But I like it in the sense of how Italo Calvino is writing about it in his novel, Mr. Palomar. So the problem is, Palomar discovered that reality does not work and constantly falls to pieces. So we must force it, more or less roughly, to assume the form of the model. And in this creational act of modeling the labyrinth, one has to highlight certain details, as Borges claims also in Story in the Book of Sand. my story will be true to reality, or in any case to my personal memory of reality, which amounts to the same thing. The events took place only a short time ago, but I know that literary habit is also the habit of adding circumstantial details and underlying high points. In the winding leaves of the labyrinth, one can find sudden connections within the walls, shortcuts. And within the concatenation, one ignores the starting and the end point. One follows the path of the source without understanding it, imitating the voices, complementing the existing works of authors. The labyrinth celebrates the artificial extensions, the intentional branching, and labyrinthine is by no means the same as but described with form and order. It means artificially and artfully sent far. It is rather consciousness than an arbitrary movement of winding. Following Jan Pieper in his book Das Labyrinthische, we can think of a labyrinthine order. The lack of clarity and confusion are not to be equated. On the contrary, the deliberate ramification, a characteristic of the labyrinthine, requires wit and the calculation of a clear head, as Jan Pieper says. So the circumstances of the writing have to prove plausibility and structurally coherent set of narrative cues. In his book on mirror and other phenomena, Umberto Eco treats Borges' method of conjecturing, named the abduction in ochre. He claims that one would never be faced with the chance of fate in the writings of Borges. One is always inside an intrigue, a cosmic or situational one, a fable devised by another mind according to the laws of the fantastic logic that is none of other than the logic of the library. And Borges also writes in one story that the labyrinth is devised by man and can only be deciphered by man. Giorgio Manganelli, in the preface to the Oedipus novel Hebdomeros, writes about this problem of a beginning and a conclusion. So he writes it would therefore be foolish to try to locate a beginning and a conclusion, to look for privileged combinations for some crux of the matter. In a building, a space, the compact city, a temple, carefully and frankly desecrated, every point is a crux, and every point both an inauguration and a seal of closure. So instead of a start and end point, it is more thought as an engendering and unfolding here. And searching for start and end point is out of time also in the mind of Theodor Adorno when he writes about the essay as form. So he states that the usual reproach against the essay is that it is fragmentary and random, but this is the problem that that we assume the givenness of the totality and thereby the identity of the subject and object. And this is only when we think about the subject being, or man being in control of this totality. The essay on the other side actually has a desire to seek and filter the eternal out of the transitory, and it wants rather to make the transitory than eternal. Four, juxtaposition. Trees in a puddle built around mutations, the reflection of reflection in the fulcrum of the concoction, Machwerk in German. In the fulcrum of the concoction, the labyrinth reveals its mask on a mirroring tableau. In the hallway, there's a mirror which faithfully duplicates all appearances. Men usually infer from this mirror that the library is not infinite. If it really were, why this illusory duplication? I prefer to dream that its polished surfaces represent and promise the infinite. So it is more about the promising of the infinite and not of the actual happening of the infinite. And the playfulness of the ambiguity has to be taken serious. In the labyrinth, it is possible that one comes back to the same knot where he already passed. Through the revelation of this crossings, one can sight the bigger picture. The doubt of seeing the real reflection guides the immersion of the gaze. In a Baroque world, architecture performs its own edging. So the dangerous absoluteness of self-centeredness is offset by the irony of mirroring, not taking the self too serious, not claiming a truth. The effectiveness of Bach's strange loops depends on a combination of precise details that appear to match our sense of what is real, juxtaposed with elements of the unreal, or better, the unimaginable. These mechanics can be compared mainly to the print of Escher in 1952, where we see a puddle on a woodland path that reflects trees in a clear sky a short time after a recent shower. That's how he described it. Though it seems that we see two perspectives at the same time, instead of looking at a mirrored vision of the sky, because somehow, the contour is not working, so that we don't see the water surface. Instead, it seems that the trees are inside of the puddle. Both Borges and Escher are concerned with imaginary images to approach infinity. In Borges, this often consists in a dream within a dream, and it is not clear where the dream ends and reality begins, or who dreams whom. And Borges creates paradoxical situations in which one can view a situation from two different perspectives, but they cannot be brought together visually, but imagined at the same time. So Borges presents a riddle for the contemplation of the reader without solving it. Christian Keres in Grupis writes that the labyrinth that becomes an ideal space in that it creates the impression of endlessness, even if it is built on a plot with a specific and clearly defined outline. He refers to it as a machine that creates the impression of an infinite endless space, restricted, maybe even a modest area. So it is only about creation of the perception of infinity again. The imaginable and the unimaginable are just opposed. 5. Arabesque. Within the talking of potentialities, the constructiveness of the narrative is playfully revealed. Precision and rigor from the winding passages, when the braid of a cosmic loom exhausts its own nature. Essay writing is less a means of reporting on past events than an exploration of the potential. In Borges' writings, the own constructiveness of the plot is revealed. They are artificial in the best sense. Often a simple setting is used as a point of departure and then spiraling outward in arabesque, therefore gradually complicating itself. Motives based on the interweaving of lines or ribbons are very ancient, as we know, so surfaces and lines detach themselves from the purely representational context and they become autonomous. It is an urge towards abstraction, a pleasure in self-indulgence and boldness. As in essay writing, here the thought experiment takes on a life of its own in ever more abstract circles. In the early 20th century, it was above all Pauclet who elevated to serpentine line. In his so-called pedagogical sketchbook of 1925, he defined it as a wandering form that develops from the spatial temporal displacement of a point. These lines are the result of the activity of the point. And then I put in this example also that you from Zurich might know better than me. So the colossal 3D printed wall by Dillenburg and Hansmeier from ETH, and it embodies a form of visceral experience, eliciting exploration through its stimulating nature. The wall engagement. So from every perspective, they might have another conflict. Arabesque ornaments, its composition and principles are both geometric and mathematical, relying on iterative tiling and surface division. So the custom softwares here allow for microscopic tile manipulation, resulting in those millions of unique surfaces through iterative folding algorithms. We experience a special form of repetition. So, well, in the words of Pliny the Elder, that Boris recalls often, words can never be repeated the same way. Depending on the context, the corridor might have another face. One could speak of it as a refrain, maybe. Guattari and Deleuze mentioned it in A Thousand Plateaus. We are now ready to return to the refrain. We can propose a new classification system. Milieu refrain with at least two parts, one of which answers the other. Meta refrains refrains for territory, where the part is related to the whole, to an immense refrain of the earth, and so on. For the cosmos itself is a refrain, and the ear also. Everything that has been taken for a labyrinth is in fact a refrain. Another essayistic writing Borges proposes that universal history is the history of a few metaphors. And as illustration, he traces the evolution of one metaphor varying throughout centuries. And by comparing the constellations, we can grasp the invariance of the equation. But the labyrinthine should never become an aesthetic end in itself. And I found this interesting reflection on the labyrinthine in Francis Bacon's preface to Instauratio Magna from 1620. But the universe to the eye of the human understanding is framed like a labyrinth, presenting as it does in every side so many ambiguities of ways, so many deceitful resemblances of objects and signs, nature so irregular in their lines and so entangled. In order to escape from this confusing lines, I am now considering the mechanics of figuration. Engendering the searching, materializing the movement within embodied metaphors that memorize the path in asymmetry and difference. Japanese scientist Okijiro Nakaya began researching snowflake formations mechanisms in the 1930s. He is credited as the first human to ever create an artificial snowflake. The unique electrostatic interactions of water molecules and a delicate balance of atmospheric conditions come together to determine what a snowflake will look like. As it falls, each snowflake then retains the memory of its path through the sky. Each slight change in temperature, humidity, and pressure resulting in unique and those elaborate forms we can see here. And Nakaya refers on snowflakes as letters from the sky, as they memorize their own history through variation in form and structure. He's fascinated with asymmetry and difference. So for him, snowflakes are testimonies of the complexity and variety of matter. To him, the broken, composite, and grouped crystals contain unique stories that the beautiful and often retouched photographs of the perfectly symmetric crystals were unable to convey. Some interpretations seek to recognize a spatial imitation of the movement of celestial bodies in the figure of the labyrinth and its winding paths. So understanding the labyrinth is an image of and here the arcs symbolize the course of the sun during the day, while the windings symbolize its course at night. Citing Siegfried Gideon in his book Space, Time and Architecture, and may be called into being by all sorts of, but once it appears, it constitutes an organism in itself, with its own character and its own bodily conditions. The architect of the labyrinth has to decide about what should be remembered. How does then Borges embody the selective memory within the form of structure of the architecture he describes? Therefore, I want to cite the famous beginning of his essay on the Library of Babel. So, the universe, which others call a library, is composed of an indefinite and perhaps infinite number of hexagonal galleries, with vast air shafts between, surrounded by very low railings. From any of the hexagons, one can see internally the upper and lower floors. The distribution of the galleries is invariable. 20 shelves, 5 long shelves per side, cover all the sides except 2. Their height, which is the distance from floor to ceiling, scarcely exceeds that of a normal bookcase. One of the 3 sides leads to a narrow hallway which opens onto another gallery identical to the first and all the rest. This is the beginning of the story, and in the Library of Babel, the architecture holds on to be the main protagonist. Without this meticulous description we have of its geometry, the story could not unfold. The vast question of the infinity of the universe is thematized through the architectonics of this artificial space of the library. We try to imagine the room with 5 long shelves on each side. However, we have no reference to the floor we are on, and repetition avoids the position in space. So, architecture acts here parallel to the linear time of the narrative, and it remains in presence. At the same time, we do not dwell in it, but we think with it. So we never feel too comfortable in its places. We always try to explore the secret spheres. In times when artificial intelligence can seemingly answer everything and find solutions to complex problems, architectural writing means illuminating the search and dramatizing the questions. In its ability then to concretize and structure the being in the world, architecture thus materializes and externalizes these thought experiences. So what we discover is less something abstract than the acknowledgement of specific material encounters with local concerns and close observations. The path of thought and matter are connected. Last, crypticality. An indexicalization of the universe, a detail embodying the whole, in a lacuna of thoughts, the incomplete walls dissolute. So, how to combine the exhausting nature of the arabesque and the simplicity of the essayistic labyrinth? One has to find a language of indexicalization. Borges gives in one story called Löhnbuch by August Tertius an impression of a whole other universe within a few pages. There's when he says, Film is surely a labyrinth, but it is a labyrinth devised by men, a labyrinth destined to be deciphered by men. It is a story of an unknown planet, a fictional world of the intelligence. And he says that, so the protagonist tells that at first it was believed that Löhn was a mere chaos, an irresponsible license of the imagination. Now it is known that it is a cosmos and that the intimate laws which govern it have been formulated, at least provisionally. It is a secret society of astronomers, engineers, biologists, metaphysicians, and geometricians, where they created a world with their own laws and rules concerning also their language. And here he gives this example of how the noun is formed by an accumulation of adjectives. So they do not say moon, but rather round, airy, light, and dark, or pale orange of the sky, or any other such combination. And this example selected does not refer to the real object, but is purely fortuitous. The literature of this hemisphere abounds in ideal objects which are convoked and solved in a moment according to poetic needs. The book has only a few examples of the way of thinking that are enough for the imagination to complement. This idea of an encapsulation of the universe within a small object is also presented in the Library of Babel. So here the idea is that one book can contain all the books of the library, or within the story of the Aleph, where the point in the basement in Buenos Aires is the only point on Earth where all places are seen from every angle, each standing here without any confusing or blending. I'm not sure if, or first we think a bit of this concept of le point harmonique, maybe of Leibniz, if it resembles this, but then in contrast here one's not taking the position of seeing the stars in the right constellations, but all the stars are contained within this one point. So he literally writes here a point in space that contains all other points. And it is this paradox of the one and the many. So if a point contains the entire universe, it must also contain itself and thus reflect itself into infinity. And the first Aleph and the second Aleph would have to form then, when we draw on the consequences, an element of the third Aleph and so on. And this may, as I think Ludger already mentioned on Monday, to the saying of the Cretans, that all Cretans are liars, and the one that states this is itself a Cretan. So it makes a statement about the text as if it were outside looking in, but he is in. And so I come back to inversion. So the labyrinth embodies the idea of a universe in a way that resembles minimalist art of Paul Klee. That's the hypothesis. When he composes this primary figures, forms, and it's called destroyed labyrinths. Maurice Merleau-Ponty was euphoric that in paintings themselves we could see a figured philosophy. When we think of the labyrinth as key to abstract thinking, also Paul Klee stated that this is making the path to abstraction. And in a diary entry he wrote, now my immediate and at the same time highest goal will be to bring the architectonic and poetic painting into a fusion, or at least to establish a harmony between them. So it is to be understood as an opening up, partly due to a deliberately fragmentary and elusive approach, the one of the essay, one which refuses completeness. Jan Pieper, and he refers here on somebody else, writes that the complicatio described the essence of the word more precisely than the explicatio. The representation of the incomprehensibility of mysteriousness holds more truth in itself than any explanation, no matter how sharp. In his book in Umberto Eco's book From the Tree to the Labyrinth, Umberto Eco differentiates between a dictionary and the encyclopedia. So whereas the first would form a rigid, closed system of knowledge in the form of a tree, the encyclopedia in form of the labyrinth would present knowledge as a network of interlinked relationships. In his mind, the encyclopedia sacrifices humankind's dream of possessing absolute knowledge, but in compensation gain freedom to pursue an infinity of new connections and meanings. So he thinks of it in a more systematic approach. Ultimately, then the architect of the labyrinth is not important anymore. The labyrinth is able to echo multiple voices. To Umberto Eco, it seems Borgesian to assume that the books speak to each other without the author's necessarily knowing each other. So those were the books that I wanted to bring in communication with each other in this talk. And here's an overview of the mechanics I mentioned. And they don't want to be complete, but yeah, fragmentary, elusive. And the analogy of the essay and the labyrinth is not pure, so there remains an obscure lacuna. When we think of the figure of the labyrinth as an instrument, it is about the sculpting of the craft knowledge. In the end, the walls will be forgotten, but the imagination of the winding paths within them is the architectonic creation. So when comparing architectural thinking to the essay writing, architecture may be the vehicle to explore. And this talk wanted to be kind of an attempt to consider the capacity of architecture to change the intonation of the universal metaphors and its capacity to make them act local. Why taking the examples of the snowflakes? And here I want to finally cite Francesco Moschini in a preface of A Light Through Architecture. The assumption that derives from it is that architectonic language needs to have the same multiplicity and the same richness as the reality on which it intervenes and from which it springs, not to penalize its ability to intervene as a proposition on that same reality. So the hope is that the figuration of labyrinthine architectonics, the multiple mechanics, may enable us to create a more capacious imaginary of the hidden bonds surrounding us.